The Juneau World Affairs Council presents Mexico at the Crossroads, Moving Backward or Forward in 2025 with Dr. David Shirk. Rounding out her first year in office, Mexico's first female president, Claudia Sheinbaum, enjoys high approval ratings. Yet Mexico continues to face serious challenges, including democratic backsliding, endemic corruption, and tensions with the current U.S. administration over trade, drugs, migration, and other bilateral issues. Dr. David Shirk is a professor of political science and international relations at the University of San Diego, where he is the past director of the Trans-Border Institute and the current director of the Justice in Mexico program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here in Juneau, and I am especially appreciative to the Juneau World Affairs Council, to Bruce Botello and his family, and to everyone who helped make it possible for me to be here today. As the introduction said, I'm going to talk a little bit about Mexico, contemporary Mexican politics, where things stand today, and especially how it pertains to us here in the United States. I'm going to do a very brief plug for a new book that I have coming out with my colleague, Dr. Emily Edmonds-Poley, also in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of San Diego. And kind of keeping with this theme of what's happening in Mexico today, I'm going to try to talk about three major topics and move through those just in the next half hour or so. I want to start out by introducing those of you who are not terribly familiar with Mexican history and Mexican politics with some of the key themes and issues in Mexico's political development. I'll talk about the state of Mexican politics today, and then I'll focus especially on the issues confronting Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, Mexico's first female president. And with no further ado, I'm going to jump in. And I'm going to start out by talking about Mexico through the lens of Mexican culture. And one of the things that I want to point out is sort of two contradictory themes or ideas when people talk about Mexico. On the one hand, you'll often hear people in Mexico say, como Mexico no hay dos. Like Mexico, there's only one, when they're talking about something really unique. And there is a certain uniqueness to Mexico, and arguably for me, it's been a point of fascination throughout my adult life to travel to the country, to meet its people, to enjoy its culture. And yet, simultaneously, there's also this idea that there are many Mexicos, hay muchos Mexicos. It's a country of tremendous complexity and contrasts and diversity, and so it's a place that is really quite fascinating, and I'm happy to get to talk a little bit about it with you tonight, and of course to get to share a lot of what I know with my students at the University of San Diego. And I'm going to start by talking about the history of Mexico in broad brushstrokes, and actually using the brushstrokes of Diego Rivera, now these days lesser known spouse of Frida Kahlo. He used to be a big deal, and now he's a plus one. Diego Rivera was one of the three most eminent muralists that emerged from the Mexican Revolutionary period, 1920s and 1930s. Diego Rivera helped to capture the intense political dramas of his time and also the history of Mexico. And what's so brilliant about so many of his murals is the way that they capture many different people and perspectives, and how in many cases he layers different historical periods on top of each other. The image I'm going to focus on most in this discussion is a mural that you can see in the National Palace in Mexico City in the Central Plaza or Zocalo. And it's a mural that captures multiple historical phases in Mexican history that are quite important to understanding its history. As you can see here, it's a little bit difficult with the white on colorful background. There are several different historical periods captured here, from Mexican in pre-Columbian history to the 1920s and 30s when Diego Rivera was working on this particular piece of art. And I'm going to zoom in on a couple of these just to illustrate the iconic nature of Rivera's work and to point out some of the important characteristics and cultural touchstones when thinking about Mexico. The first is really just starting here sort of in the center of that painting. You can see in the upper center of the image I'm showing you here an image of an eagle and a serpent, which is part of the founding mythology of Mexico, that when the Aztec people were searching for a place to settle after being kicked out of their service to another group. They were warriors. They got in trouble because they appear to have flayed and killed the wife of a chief who had given his daughter as a gift to them. They got kicked out. And they roamed the wilderness for many years and eventually, by prophecy, found a location in the center of Mexico in a lake bed where they saw an eagle standing on a cactus devouring a serpent. And right next to that, you can see images of the Spanish conquest, led by Hernán Cortés, who arrived and sort of audaciously, with several dozen men, took on an empire of millions and conquered Mexico. And you can see the cultural legacies as well of the conquest and colonization of Mexico in this very same painting, with these images of the overthrow and the decimation of the native population, indigenous population, which really went with sword and cross in hand as the army or the military and the church were instruments of colonial expansion into Mexico. And of course also the rape and the mixing of cultures that took place as part of that conquest. After this period, 300 plus years of colonial domination by the Spanish, there was a push by liberal elites born in the new land to break free of to break free of the Spaniards. And these liberals went on to found Mexico's constitutional democracy. And there was this sort of 19th century tension between the liberal champions of democracy in Mexico and the conservative forces of traditional sort of autocratic rule. Featured here in this painting, for example, you can see Benito Juárez, who helped to bring about an era of liberal reform in the mid-19th century, helped bring about the 1857 Constitution that to this day helps to shape Mexican governance. But also some of the opposing forces, particularly the church and the military and the landed elites, who helped to preserve a tradition of persistent autocracy in Mexico that lasted throughout much of the 19th century and into the 20th. And featured here, of course, we see, or you hopefully can see in the upper left-hand corner, the great dictator of the late 19th century, Porfirio Diaz, the strong man of Mexico who ruled for 34 years continuously with an iron fist and with the support of foreign capitalists and investors, and was eventually overthrown by this man featured here in the lower right-hand corner, Francisco Madero. But a couple of other themes come up as well. in Mexican history, of course, Mexico's relationship to the rest of the world, the problem from the Mexican perspective of foreign invasion and foreign intrusion, whether it was the French trying to impose a Habsburg emperor on Mexico in the 1850s, or the United States taking 40% of Mexico's territory in the 1940s, 1946 to 1948, what we call the U.S. Mexican War, and what the Mexicans call the War of U.S. Aggression. It's all a question of perspective. But the Mexico has been likened to a porcupine sleeping next to a bear. And has a certain sensitivity to its lumbering northern neighbor, and the occasional missteps and aggression that it experiences from north of the border. And lastly, and this is germane, I think, in the early 21st century, the problem of serious internal divisions, violence, and even revolutionary upheaval, which gives birth in the early 20th century to modern Mexico. I mean, in many ways, Mexico is so fascinating to me because it's really a laboratory for understanding world politics that's, I think, unparalleled. The 1910 Mexican Revolution goes really from 1910 to, depending on how you date it, 1917, maybe all the way to 1929. But that revolution is the first great social revolution of the 20th century. Most people think about revolutions, they think about Russia, they think about China, but Mexico's revolution was the testing ground for revolutionary ideas and even military technologies that shaped the 20th century. And so Mexico's experience has a lot to offer. It's a rich and complex history, and it's a useful way to kind of enter into some of the themes that I think are important for contemporary Mexican politics. The revolutionary period that I just spoke of is really kind of one of three major phases that I think we can point to over the last 100, 120 years in Mexico. And I'm going to talk about those in turn over the next couple of minutes. First, I mean, the 1910 revolution, as I mentioned, first great social revolution of the 20th century, is instigated by liberal elites, people who were believers in democracy and wanted to see political change without necessarily social or economic change. Francisco y Madero was an educated, English-speaking, sort of genteel member of the Mexican aristocracy or economic elite who heard Porfirio Diaz say that he thought at some point he might step down or appoint a successor, and he thought he himself, Francisco Madero, might be the person to kind of gently move on to a new era of leadership. But when he did this, he got arrested and essentially exiled or self-exiled after he escaped from prison. And when he came back to Mexico, his effort to try to overthrow the Diaz government unleashed social forces that I think he was did not anticipate. We saw northern working class and even working class people and even bandits like Pancho Villa, Francisco Villa, rise up in arms to support him. Eventually, agrarian workers or so-called peasants like Francisco Zapata, Emiliano Zapata, who rose up in the South and ultimately helped to overthrow Diaz. Diaz, as he was leaving, going off to be feted in Europe and celebrated as this great overthrown strongman, looked back and said, you know, Madero is holding a tiger by the tail. And that captured the sentiment that after any great revolutionary upheaval, it's very difficult to bring back and restore political order. And in most revolutionary scenarios, certainly in the 20th century, the way that people achieved that, the way that people brought about political order from political chaos, was by the creation of a one-party state. Whether you're talking about Russia, China, Cuba, Nicaragua, the best way to sort of re-establish control is to get everybody under one big umbrella, and anybody who doesn't want to get under the umbrella, make sure you shoot them. So that's very much what we see in Mexico. From at least 1929 to 1988, there is effectively a one-party state in Mexico under the umbrella of what was known as the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or in its Spanish initials, the PRI. Not Public Radio International, no connection. And the PRI basically had three ways that it maintained political control. As any good one-party state, I mean, the first and cheapest option is to keep people happy, to co-opt groups that are potentially going to challenge you, try to buy them out and get them on board with the program, whether that's by bribing people or giving them bread and circuses, whatever you need to do to maintain people's loyalty. And then to maintain the appearance of legitimacy, the PRI regime, the pre-regime, held elections regularly, faithfully. But there was only one winner in those elections. And they controlled the electoral process in a way that enabled them to maintain control. And if anybody got out of line, if anybody objected, if anybody challenged the PRI in any serious way, then they would use as a last resort coercion, whether that was running somebody off the road, literally political candidates being mysteriously rubbed out, or using arrests, any other means of coercion. And this formula worked really well for the PRI up until the 1980s, when a series of economic difficulties, even corruption scandals and the like, led to the opening of a new era of democratic pluralism. The 1988 elections, for example, brought about a real challenge to the PRI from the left. A candidate named Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, the son of a former president, runs for office. And the PRI's, he's so popular that the PRI has to resort to extraordinary fraudulent measures. Burning ballots. People showed up at the polls and the ballot boxes were stuffed full of ballots. It was such an obvious fraud that it really helped to reduce the legitimacy of the PRI regime and led to successive opposition challenges over the course of the 1990s, where the opposition began to win municipal governments, state governments, and eventually in the year 2000, they were able to defeat the PRI through a campaign run by a former Coca-Cola executive named Vicente Fox. He ran as the conservative candidate of the National Action Party, or the PAN, and defeated the PRI. His successor, Felipe Calderón, same party. Oh my gosh, there's a typo in my slide. I apologize. He's not. Calderón was also from the PAN, longtime family in the PAN. And then after his term, we see alternation back to the PRI. And then in 2018, we see the rise of a new leftist candidate named Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who's actually by that point on his third or fourth presidential run. But what this looks like is a nice, healthy democracy that's competitive and where democratic rules are being followed. There's free and fair elections. There's open, free press, and all the elements of a liberal democracy. The challenge, I think, and the crossroads that Mexico is at, is that the López Obrador presidency really began to make a major shift on a couple of different dimensions for Mexico, starting economically. I mean, López Obrador railed against the neoliberal economic model of the late 20th, early 21st century, right? The so-called Washington consensus that markets should be open and integrated, and that the government should take a laissez-faire, hands-off approach, killed the social welfare programs. López Obrador felt very strongly that that approach had failed Mexico and began what he called a fourth transformation of Mexican politics and economics, the 4T, as he called it, the fourth transition, in which he wanted to move Mexico back to a model that involved more state-led intervention in the economy and tried to strengthen the social welfare state. Of course, critics of state-led programs, people like Friedrich von Hayek and other neoliberal economists, would argue that whenever you start to restrict the market, you're necessarily restricting freedoms. And so that made at least people who had economic means very nervous about the possibility of López Obrador's efforts to control the market. Now, if you look at, it's very difficult to see this in the audience here, but if you look at the right-hand side of this graph, you can see the period of economic growth under López Obrador didn't look very different in terms of annual growth rates from what we had seen under the preceding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 neoliberal presidents. And in fact, really Mexico's economic growth hasn't met its full potential, arguably, since at least the year 2000. If Mexico's economy had grown at 2% a year in terms of per capita GDP starting in 1960, today you'd see a much higher rate of GDP per capita than you see in real terms, in US dollar terms, not PPP or purchasing power parity. The average Mexican would be making about 14,000 real US dollars a year. As it stands today, they're still around $11,000, $12,000 a year. The other problem, of course, that we saw over the last 20 years or so in Mexico was a widespread proliferation of criminal violence, and especially violence in drug markets or markets for illicit drugs. Clashes between what we know in the United States as cartels or organized crime groups, transnational criminal organizations, whatever you want to call them, with a dramatic increase in homicide rates. To date, as of right now, over the course of the 21st century, over 250,000 Mexicans have died by homicide. And that's about half the number of Americans that have died from drug overdoses, right? So together, we're both experiencing very serious losses as a result of this problem. Now, López Obrador had a very different approach, and one that many US officials found concerning, challenging, problematic. His idea was that Mexico should move to a strategy of abrazos no balazos, hugs, not shootouts, was his idea. And the idea was to stop going around, arresting or killing the Chapo Guzmans, because that just left a power vacuum that would lead to more violence. And rather, you should focus on the roots, the socioeconomic roots of crime and violence, and invest in scholarships for young people, internships, things to get young people off the streets. And so he faced that challenge during his presidency, but he also faced another challenge, which was a shift in US politics, a shift from really a policy of engagement over the last 30, 40, 50 years with Mexico, trying to get Mexico to open up and to be an economic partner to the United States as well as Canada, and a politics now that really emphasized Mexico as a problem for the United States, that's to some degree demonized Mexico and Mexicans. The famous quote from Donald Trump as he rode down the golden escalator of Trump Tower, you know, when Mexico sends us its people, they're not sending their best, they're sending people that have lots of problems, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. This characterization and portrayal of Mexico is really, it's the first time Mexico becomes a central issue in a presidential campaign in the United States, and it has really, I think, dramatically affected U.S.-Mexico relations. It caused López Obrador to really have to be cautious in how he dealt with President Trump and U.S.-Mexico relations. And I get the feeling, personally, this is a judgment call, but I think he looks a lot happier on one side of the image than the other. I will leave that to your judgment. But clearly there was a big shift in U.S. Foreign policy. And the thing that López Obrador tried to do, and that I think sets shows us a shift in Mexican policy towards the United States, was to really take a tougher line on migration, especially migration moving from Central America into the United States. We saw Mexico do much more to fortify its southern border, to try to receive immigrants from Central America and refugees. And so this became part of López Obrador's playbook to try to assuage, to some degree, the Trump administration and to avoid Mexico being caught in the crosshairs. The last thing I'll say about López Obrador is, whatever you may think of him, he was arguably a very effective politician in transforming Mexican politics. Whether he achieved his vision of a fourth political transformation or not arguably remains to be seen. But what we did see is a dramatic shift in the Mexican party system. That multi-party presidential system that I described from the year 2000, or really 1988 even, till the year 2018, has basically vanished in a relatively short period of time since López Obrador founded his Morena party in 2014. And that in the 11-year period since he founded that party has completely overtaken Mexican politics. And we saw that initially in the 2018 presidential election. We saw it for sure in the 2024 presidential election, when Sheinbaum was swept in with an unquestioned landslide majority in her presidency. So the real question, I think, in terms of Crossroads, is Mexico at a crossroads where it is going back to being a single-party state? And what does that mean for Mexico? What does that mean, arguably, for U.S.-Mexico relations? I think a lot remains to be seen. But when you look at the political representation, for example, of the PRI, pictured in red here, it's almost non-existent. Mexico's Revolutionary Party, the party that founded the modern Mexican state, is almost gone. And the leftist party, the 1980s and 90s, the PRD, is literally now an unregistered party. And this is shocking for political scientists like myself. We also saw AMLO use that new majority, López Obrador use that new majority to push through a very controversial judicial reform in in the last 30 days of his lame duck presidency. He used Sheinbaum's constitutional, electoral majority, the new Congress that came in, to push forward new judicial reforms. So that brings us to Claudia Sheinbaum and what we can expect from her. First of all, Claudia Sheinbaum is a widely respected politician. She was a member of the PRD, joined López Obrador in 2014 when he formed the Morena party. She worked her way up through the ranks as she was initially the Mexico City Secretary of the Environment, having done her doctoral degree in energy engineering and writing dozens of articles on environmental sustainability, writing 2 books on climate change and environmental sustainability. And she really developed her political profile as a bit of a technocrat, a bit of a policy wonk, particularly on environmental issues. She's also, in addition to obviously being a woman, she is also Mexico's first person of Jewish descent to ascend to the presidency. Now, how did this happen? How did Mexico suddenly go from being the most macho country in North America to the country that has a female president? It did not happen by accident. It is not just because Claudia Sheinbaum is a good politician, although I think that is true. One of the things that I think shaped Mexico's progress on female representation was the introduction back in the 90s of electoral gender quotas for representation in the legislature. We started to see a dramatic increase over the 2010s and into the 20s of female representation. At this point, you have basically equal representation of men and women in elected offices in Mexico. And that happened because they passed a law that required there to be an equal number of candidates for different positions. So what's her objective? What's her goal? Claudia Sheinbaum's Plan Mexico really points to a couple of things. One is when she was elected, right before she was elected, most voters or most Mexicans pointed to the problems of crime and insecurity, the economy, and health as their major concerns. This is post-COVID, of course, so the health issues are partly related to that. But these are some of the things that shaped Claudia Sheinbaum's approach to Mexico's situation. The first is getting organized crime under control. And what we've seen in the first year of the Sheinbaum administration is that, first of all, under López Obrador, we saw a slight decline. He's the red line at the top. He inherited the most violent situation of any president in the last 25 years. And he was able to bring violence down, at least as measured by homicides, by about 20%. Sheinbaum has done that in her first year by another 20%, mainly by working closely with the military, pushing forward professional criminal investigations, and it remains to be seen whether this is a permanent equilibrium, but arguably no Mexican president has brought crime down more quickly than Sheinbaum, and it will be a huge token to her leadership if she actually is able to continue that trend. Of course, the other side of rule of law is the election of Mexico's new judiciary, which took place in June of this year. The reform that AMLO pushed forward put at every level all Mexican judicial positions up for election. Imagine if we could vote for the Supreme Court here in the United States. What would happen? It would be crazy, right? But every single judge at every single level is going to now be elected by the popular vote in Mexico. And that's a great thing to do if you happen to be the majority party. What a great reform to put in place. But it obviously raises huge questions of judicial independence and autonomy. And it especially raised questions about validity or legitimacy of these elections when it turned out that only 13% of Mexicans showed up at the polls. Of that 13%, or of the total vote, I should say, about 25%, 1 in 4 votes cast was invalid because either they didn't fill out the bubble or they wrote something that was invalid. So this is arguably an incredibly illegitimate political process, and there's a lot of issues that maybe we can discuss later. The thing that both López Obrador and Sheinbaum arguably can claim real credit for, and that has been to their credit, is the way that Mexico's economy has changed for the better for average working and poor Mexicans. Unlike the United States, which is featured in this little lower left-hand corner here, we've actually seen inequality, something a lot of people think about a lot in Mexico. Inequality has gone down and came down rather dramatically over the course of the López Obrador administration. He effectively tripled the minimum wage nominally, which even in real terms, adjusting for inflation, doubled the minimum wage in Mexico from about $5 a day when he started his term in 2018 to about $15 per day, which again, adjusting for inflation, it's about at least doubling the minimum wage. These have been huge changes and is part of what explains the popularity of Morena. The other thing that's really important that both López Obrador has done and Sheinbaum has continued is the investment in Mexico's social welfare state. While some countries are slashing social welfare budgets around the world, others, like Mexico, are investing heavily in pensions for the elderly, in scholarships for young people to go to school. And this is yielding huge dividends in terms of their popularity, the popularity of the Morena party, but also arguably real social benefits in terms of taking care of Mexico's aging population and helping to educate the next generation of Mexican leaders. I'll turn last to Mexico's relationship with the rest of the world, particularly the United States. As we see here, Mexico depends very heavily on one country as a market for its goods. That is the United States. About 80% of what Mexico sells to the world goes to the United States. We are their most important customer. But Mexico is actually also one of our, if not the most important customer for US goods. And if the average Mexican earned double in 10 years what they earn today, they would easily be our most important economic partner, even consuming more than Canada. What we also see here in this picture is the rise of China as a source of imports for Mexico and potentially an opportunity for Mexico to look elsewhere for economic partnerships if the United States is not willing to engage. And so I think that the question that we are left with is how will Claudia Sheinbaum handle her relationship with the United States? How will she especially handle the unpredictable and powerful Donald Trump? Many people have, some people have described her, I think it's Forbes or Fortune magazine described Sheinbaum as a Trump whisperer, someone who's able to get out in front to sort of distract or at least anticipate Trump's possible attacks and to figure out ways to maneuver effectively in ways that help to assuage his anger. We'll see. She has managed to, I think, do a better job, say, than Canada in handling the tariff situation and so on. We'll see how long she can avoid getting gobbled up by the shark. At this present moment, though, I think it's very clear that Claudia Sheinbaum is one of the most popular leaders in the world. She's got 80% public approval rating, which is higher than any president, any man who's ever been president of Mexico. Just by a hair, she's more popular than Vicente Fox was at the start of his term. She's more popular than López Obrador was. And so, you know, she has a lot of political capital, and how she chooses to spend that over the next few years is going to be really interesting to see. Will she really be able to sort of make the Morena movement her own and shape Mexico's future destiny? I think that's something really interesting to watch. The last thing I'll say is I think the big concern, and the reason why I say Mexico is at a crossroads, is my concern that Mexico, like many countries around the world, over the last just 5 or 10 years, has seen a growing level of intolerance and attitudes of frustration about the way democratic governance works, or often doesn't work by design. And what we've seen, for example, in a survey called the Latino Barometer, is rising anti-democratic sentiments. More people, some 1/3 of Mexicans, saying in the last survey in 2023 that in certain circumstances an authoritarian government can be preferable to a democratic one. I feel exactly the same way. I personally prefer an autocratic government that I'm in charge of because that's the best government of all. But of course, that's the problem with democracy, is it's unpredictable and you don't know that you're going to be the sovereign. So it is, I think, an important question to ask. What direction will Mexico go? How will Mexico go forwards and continue on the path that we've seen in the early 20th century of competitive elections and sort of checks and balances? Or will it go back to what we saw in the 20th century and what we're starting to see, unfortunately, in too many parts of the world? And that is a tendency towards autocracy and authoritarianism that is very, very dangerous and would, I think, lead the world down a very dark path. So I'm going to, on that cheery note, I'm going to stop and look forward to some of your questions.
Again, if you have questions, please go to the mic and feel free to queue up.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm Bill Leedy. Forward or backward was your title. On what scale? By what measure? By what criterion or criteria? I think it's becoming apparent to the human civilization that the scale of progress we need is unity for the planet rather than the divisions emerging among us, which lead to this erosion of the democratic process as you see it, I think. What do you think?
I appreciate the question. It's a great question. I think that, first of all, a key metric for me is whether, in fact, we see, I think democratic choice matters. And I think that as long as elections are free and fair in Mexico, it's fine if people want to choose one party, especially if that's a party that's delivering the goods when it comes to people's well-being. I couldn't be happier to see the increase in Mexico's minimum wage, the growth of its middle class. All of those are good things for Mexico and its democracy. What worries me is when the institutions are rigged or captured in ways that are clearly intended to sustain certain groups in power, because unfortunately power is a corrupting influence on everyone. Unchecked power is certainly prone to corruption. The thing that I'm, to your point especially about our need to unify as a planet and hinting at the issue of sustainability, I have tremendous respect for Claudia Sheinbaum and her knowledge and expertise. I mean, she has been a real champion of environmental sustainability, of mitigating the problems of climate change, and it's great to see a world leader that is going to step up and push forward policies that will benefit all humankind. So in that sense, I think that's one step forward. The question is whether Mexico's democracy and democratic governance will similarly move forward.
Hello, Amy Lujan here. Thank you for being here. So we're in the midst of this whole immigration policy shift here in the United States. And my understanding is that there are a lot of Mexicans who used to work in the United States and would come and go perhaps. And now they're either being forced out or they're leaving because they don't want to be, caught up in this whole problem that we're having here. I think that's a problem for our economy, and I'm wondering how big of a problem is that for the Mexican economy? They won't be bringing the resources back into Mexico. Will that create political issues as well?
That's a great question. That's a two-part question. I'll start with just thinking a little bit about migration to the United States. And it's true that we've been a little inconsistent in our immigration policies over the last 200 years. Sometimes we welcome them, then we don't, and pretty much for every immigrant group in the United States, we've got a nasty name for them, right? Whether they're Irish mix or German Krauts or Italian wops. I mean, throughout our history, we have denigrated the immigrant at the same time that we have called ourselves a nation of immigrants. And so we're in yet another phase of that long story of sort of tension over the immigration issue. As far as Mexicans are concerned, we started to encourage Mexicans to come to the United States during World War II, especially. I mean, many Mexicans came to the United States because we went to war with them and the border crossed them, right, as they like to point out. But it was really in the 1940s that we started to see the so-called braceros, which refers to the arms of the workers who came across to help us pick vegetables and man, literally in most cases, the wartime economy while our boys were overseas. After that, when our boys came back home, we started to crack down on immigration. We had a huge deportation effort in 1954 under President Eisenhower, unfortunately labeled or named Operation Wetback, to push Mexicans out. But then in the 1960s, we began to open up our immigration system more considerably through the 1964 Immigration Act. That brought a lot of new immigrants to the United States who had not traditionally been allowed to come, Asians, but also folks from the Americas. And so the message, I think, if you're a foreigner looking to come to the United States, is there's this weird history of welcoming and then pushing away and shutting things down. Mexicans who came in the 1960s and 70s after the 1964 Immigration Act, some of them came without authorization because we now had quotas for the number of Mexicans who could come, and previously we did not. So this large pool of undocumented people in the 1970s and 80s had to find some kind of remedy and relief. The Reagan administration provided that with the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, and that bought some time to the present moment. What's interesting, though, is since 1986, we've actually seen, or since the 1980s and 90s, we've actually seen the number of Mexicans migrating to the United States go down. Over time, as Mexico's economy has stabilized, this is the second part of the question, as Mexico's economy has become more stable, fewer people have wanted to leave. And in fact, more people have been going home on average for the last 10 years than coming here. So we have net negative migration with Mexico. Mexicans are actually leaving. We need to maybe bring more back. And in the meantime, we've seen problems elsewhere in Central America, Venezuela, push new groups of immigrants into the country through Mexico. So Mexico arguably is not the problem anymore. The border is a problem for maybe half of the undocumented immigration of the United States. We don't have very good numbers, but estimates range from 40 to 60% of the undocumented population simply being people who overstayed visas, people who were authorized to come here, never walked across the border, but just decided they wanted to stay. So, I mean, for me personally, I think the challenge when we talk about the immigration issue is that we're not all on the same page. We're not using the same, we don't see the same information, and we really need to understand that the problem is actually pretty simple. And a lot of people have simple solutions. They think if you build a wall, if you throw more Border Patrol agents at the border, you're going to solve it. But the problem isn't the border. The problem is how many legal slots do you have? And how easy is it to get here if you want to come the right way, as people like to say? And it's not. It's not easy at all. We have about 140, 160,000 low-wage worker visas that we give out every year. Those are used up on day one. And the reason we have another 200,000-300,000 people coming into the country without authorization is because there is no other path for them. So to me, the solution's pretty simple. On the US side, just facilitate legal entry, right? And you will see the problems at the border go way down. The real problem we're going to have, though, is now that Mexicans don't want to come and fill our economy, who do we get to come to help us out? And I don't know what's going to happen with Venezuela. Central America is some of the violence that we saw in Central America that was pushing them out. I don't think it's going to cause them to come. In the next 10 years, I think we could be, like Europe, starting to raise real concerns about our ability to maintain population replacement rates and to fill our economy. So I'm hopeful. I'll end with this, but I moved from Pennsylvania as an immigrant, from Pennsylvania to California in 1993. And in that year, we saw Pete Wilson, the governor of California, impose some very draconian anti-immigrant policies. And for a few years, California was an anti-immigrant state run by a Republican who was making it life very difficult and trying to get them to self-deport. Within 10 years, the political dynamics in California shifted dramatically in the other direction as people began to realize that we need immigrants and we like immigrants. And so it's very possible that the United States is currently going through its Pete Wilson phase. I hope that that's, for the sake of many immigrants that I know and love, I hope that that's true, that at the end of the day, we recognize that the United States is a country of immigrants. It's a country that has always benefited, net benefited from the people who've come here. And we'll see, but I think the current moment is a difficult one. I think Sheinbaum's best bet is to do what she can to manage migration flows coming through her country and to make Mexico a great place for people to stay.
We have time for one more question, if there's someone who would like to take advantage.
I have a question, sorry, I should go to Mike. I'm not really quite sure how to ask it because you showed quite a breadth of information there.
Sorry, I threw too much at you in that
No,
response.
maybe everybody else took it in. I just was, a lot of it was very important, and so I ended up finding myself pondering some of the slides maybe longer and not listening as closely to you. But that being said, my name's Frankie, sorry, in case that needs to be on there, I don't know. The slide that you showed, the dramatic change in the election districts and how they've gone from here to here, it just was blowing my mind. And I wonder if you had anything more that you could add to the text there. That
Sure.
It was very impressive slide, as well as I could see it from where I was sitting.
First of all, I want to give credit to Alberto 617, who generated these images. These are wiki domain images that I did not generate myself, but they're excellent. What I think happened here, what I think is really important is, first of all, we have to remember that the Calderon administration, I didn't really talk much about Felipe Calderon, but Felipe Calderon from 2006 to 2012 dramatically escalated Mexico's fight against the cartels, raising, arguably contributing to the increase in the level of violence in Mexico. And basically, I think, delegitimizing the National Action Party and making it possible for the PRI to return to power. And at that point in time, political scientists were all nervous about the possibility that the PRI would come back and it would reinstitute the old regime. So my fretting and my worry about Morena is something I've fretted about before. But what was interesting about the Peña Nieto administration is that the Peña Nieto administration was incredibly corrupt and arguably inept. It also mishandled the security situation very badly. We saw serious massacres and continued increases in the level of violence over the course of his term. And that was, again, an election killer for the incumbent party. And I think what's partly going on here is that you had the right, had a bite at the apple and ultimately disappointed voters. You had the old ruling party come back and have a bite at the apple and ultimately disappoint voters. And in 2018, I really think that after years in which López Obrador had tried to run and come in, a close second, or in one case in 2006, some people think he won the election. I think finally voters were like, you know what, let's just give this guy a chance. And he was also, I think, very smart about building his his party as a coalition that brought people from the old ruling party, from the PRD, even from the PAN. And his effectiveness as a coalition builder, I think, should not be discounted in thinking about this dramatic change. And I think it shows lessons for anybody who wants to win elections, right? Number one, don't mess up. Don't ruin the economy. Don't ruin the security situation. Do no harm, number one. But also think about ways to pragmatically integrate people behind a good cause. And in his case, the idea of improving social welfare in Mexico, helping a poor country improve its economic fortunes, I think that's a winning message and one that other leaders could maybe learn from.
That was Dr. David Shirk in this Juneau World Affairs Council presentation, produced in collaboration with KTOO. It was recorded September 11th, 2025 at KTOO in Juneau. JWAC presentations are supported by season sponsors Core Alaska Kensington Mine and Wastman & Associates.